Hi everyone, my name is Courtney Schultz and I'm excited on behalf of the team, including Jason and Maria, to be presenting today our initial findings from the peak season visitor use survey. So part of the reason why you've been looking at visitor use is the fact that conservation's role has been changing. Almost 25 years ago, when TNC's Emiquon Preserve Floodplain Restoration Project was conceived, it was on a backdrop of a time and an era when the role of partnership and community use were often subsumed by a focus on land and water and archaeological survey work. And since that time, Emiquon has really risen to be a place that is renowned as being a great birding location across the state and across the nation. And so visitor use at Emiquon really has changed over the years. Beginning in 2000, right, the focus was on the preparation and the activation of restoration at Emiquon. And so it wasn't until 2005 when the first public use really began with the limited waterfowl hunting season. By 2009, those recreational activities had expanded to include fishing and boating and wildlife viewing. And it wasn't until 2011 where we saw visitor use infrastructure upgrades, including the public use area and the new interpretive signage, really began to welcome in visitors in a very concrete way. And so there's a need to really understand who is coming to Emiquon and why they're coming in to Emiquon in order to create a better user experience and increase visitor support for conservation and restoration activities. And so what we've been doing is collecting data to figure those questions out. So today we're going to be presenting our peak season results. So these are our findings from our July and August 2023 on-site intercept surveys and online surveys. So we had a data collector out on site who was stopping folks as they were exiting the site. So we made sure folks had an opportunity to go enjoy Emiquon, and on their way out, we stopped and asked them if they would participate in our survey. Those shifts of data collection ran morning and afternoon, 8 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. and again in the afternoon, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. And overall, we were able to collect 95 completed surveys. Now, this represented 67% of eligible groups who completed the intercept survey. Just a quick note on who these respondents were. In order to complete the survey, you had to be 18 years or older. So we are not capturing any youth voice in this particular data collection wave. If there were multiple parties in a group, we only surveyed one individual per group. And so to avoid any sort of bias of, folks being outspoken or self-selecting into this, we would ask whose birthday was closer to the date, and we would survey that individual. And so we went about this in a very systematic way to make sure that we were sampling as much of a wide and randomized population as we possibly could. And so overall, 95 completed surveys is a really great look at who these respondents and visitors are. So the information that we're presenting today is the summary of those responses, the respondents to our online and our on-site survey. And who were these folks? Overwhelmingly, they self-identified as male. They tended to fall into slightly older age bracket categories. More than 60% of visitors were over the age of 40. Most of our visitors were self-describing as white. The racial breakdown of our respondents really was quite reflective of the surrounding Illinois communities. Overall, this was a highly educated population. More than 50% of our respondents had some college experience, if not a degree. Income was one of those questions that more folks opted to skip or not answer at all. But the income that was provided, again, was also in keeping with a lot of the national and local demographic information for the state of Illinois, especially in that particular region. Visitors came from a wide array of locations. There were 55 unique zip codes provided for 9 states across these 95 respondents. Probably not too surprising, the top 3 reported zip codes were locally from Canton, Havana, and Lewiston. But we also wanted to understand not just demographics of who folks are and how they self-identify with various aspects of identity. We wanted to know a little bit about their visitation behavior. And so we asked how often folks were coming back to visit. 78% of visitors were repeat visitors. Of those 78% of visitors, when we asked them how often they were coming, right, they were coming a lot. More than half of visitors were coming 7 times or more in a year. 15% of those visitors were coming more than 30 times in a year. Winter was the least visited season. Fall was 68% of those visitors. Obviously, 100% of them were visiting in summer due to when we were sampling. But what's interesting is 33% of those visitors were visiting year-round. So we have some interesting, perhaps, super users in these groups. We also looked at whether or not they were coming by themselves or with groups. Overwhelmingly, right, 75% of these groups were comprised of 2 or more people. Only 24% of folks were coming alone. And of those folks that were coming with somebody else, 50% of those 50% of those groups were visiting with family. But we didn't want to know just who these individuals were in terms of identity. We also wanted to know about their experience. Why were they coming to Emiquon? What were they doing when they were on site? So we asked them to select all that applied, which of the activities they were engaging with in during their visit to Emiquon. Perhaps a little bit surprising, knowing that Emiquon is known for its bird watching, is the fact that just viewing the broad scenery, walking the trail actually outscored bird watching. What didn't really rise to the top, which we were really quite interested by, was the number of folks who made a point to let us know that they came because of the opportunity to engage in the driving tour to do these other activities. And that became a really interesting point around accessibility for an older demographic. We also asked about their experience. When you're deciding to come to Emiquon, how important is it to experience these different items? To be close to nature was the highest scored of these items. And so all of these items came out as very important to folks, but to be close to nature was rated just a little bit higher than the rest of those items. When we talked about visitor experience, though, we didn't just focus on the positives. We asked people, hey, how problematic were each of these various 19 items during your visit to Emiquon? And we looked at these responses both in terms of an overall mean, so all 95 respondents, but we also then divided that into categories of first-time visitors and repeat visitors. And we started to see some interesting differences when we started to create typologies or groupings of visitors. So first-time visitors overall tended to be a lot more positive, of saying, hey, not a problem, this was a great experience. And on several of those items, we found that repeat visitors were a little bit more critical of those offerings and were indicating that maybe that was a small problem. So things like usability of the boat ramp, lake water level, availability of restrooms, repeat visitors were indicating that that was more of a small problem than our first-time visitors were. But on the other side of this, when we asked things like the adequacy of display of information both on-site and online, that trend switched. Now we were seeing that first-time visitors were more critical, saying it was more of a small problem than our repeat visitors. And so several of these items relatively had lower overall values compared to other items, but it's worth pointing out here, right? On a scale, 3 being a small problem, 4 not a problem, none of these items were coming out as indicating anything more than a small problem. A 1 or a 2 would be a big or a moderate problem. And so overall, visitors have very few complaints about their visits to Emiquon, which was really exciting to see. But we also wanted to know, hey, overall, how satisfied or dissatisfied were you with your visit to Emiquon? 94% of visitors were satisfied to some degree. 72% of those visitors were extremely satisfied. 22% were somewhat satisfied. So again, we're seeing really great positive responses to their experience. But we also wanted to know whether or not visitors perceived any sort of recreational benefits from the activities they were coming to engage in. So we asked them to rank and give us feedback on how important some of these items were when deciding to come to Emiquon, whether it was to reduce stress, improve their physical health, improve their mental health, improve their mood. All of those items, folks were, really quick to quip, oh, extremely important. So you see those reflected in this standard deviation and the mean here that, those ratings were falling in that very important category. Interestingly, though, to be with friends and family, people did not find that as a motivating factor or even important in making a decision to come to Emiquon, despite the fact that 70% of these respondents were there with somebody else. So that's an interesting trend that we'll continue to look at as we do different waves of this visitor use. The other thing that we were looking at was whether or not there was place attachment. The idea of place attachment, we know from the literature, is incredibly important in order to predict whether or not those visitors are developing a relationship with the space and then engaging in conservation activities to help steward that place. And so there's two different aspects of place attachment: emotional place attachment and functional place attachment. Unsurprisingly, first-time visitors were pretty neutral. They didn't really agree or disagree whether or not they felt any sort of attachment to Emiquon. That's to be expected. What we did see, though, was a difference with the repeat visitors. Repeat visitors agreed that they had an emotional place attachment, but they were trending back towards that neutral space with the functional place attachment. And so the emotional place attachment is saying that, hey, I think Emiquon is very special. Functional place attachment says whether or not somebody would very willingly swap out Emiquon for a different site. And that's where we want to focus in from management to see if we can increase those scores, because folks that have a higher functional place attachment are going to be the individuals who are showing up to support and actively engaging in conservation and restoration activities on site. So opportunity to explore that a little bit more. But we also asked about visitors' conservation support and awareness. We wanted to know how primed they were to participate in TNC's overall mission. Only 10% of respondents were TNC members. 85% were not members, and were often folks that would ask, is that who operates this place? I thought this was state land. So again, opportunity there to help address some of the informational gaps that exist with our visitors. When we asked about if they were a member of any conservation or environmental group other than the Nature Conservancy, that grew to 25% being members of some sort of a conservation group. So compared to TNC membership, it does appear that there's an opportunity to maybe grow and engage visitors to become TNC members. We also asked when they were to assess Emiquon and its role in protecting these three items: landscape from development, providing habitat for wildlife, protecting water quality. Overall, visitors and respondents were saying, yep, we agree with that. The highest item that they agreed with was providing habitat for wildlife. Water quality and landscape development fell slightly lower, but still, again, those means of over a 4, very high, good indication that they were really supportive of this. Now, we asked them that same kind of setup to agree or disagree with these 4 items based on the requirement that they actually read the interpretive signs per the response in question number 2. We asked them if what they learned from engaging with the interpretive signage. We asked about floodplain restoration, rivers and wetlands, land management issues, conservation issues. The highest mean was for floodplain restoration, and that was a mean of 3.83. Now, overall, these means were really falling in that somewhat agree category compared with the previous question, where most of our respondents were overwhelmingly strongly agreeing that Emiquon played an important role. The agreement level was a little bit less for these interpretive signs, so indicating perhaps that there's an opportunity to improve or update some of that language to be providing a little bit more of an educational experience for folks and getting key critical issues across to visitors. We also asked how important it was when deciding to come to Emiquon to learn about the floodplain restoration. It was not important. It was slightly important to folks. And overall, all the questions that we asked about this in question 9, this was the lowest scored item. So again, the education around the floodplain restoration, perhaps in part because folks that are coming are local by and large, they are repeat visitors. It's not a new concept to them, so maybe it's an opportunity to start to dig into more timely topics like the ebb and flow of how these wetland restoration projects go and what phase of restoration Emiquon is currently in and looking to head into. So some opportunities there for management. We also asked whether or not, as a result of their visit to Emiquon, agree or disagree the extent to which you are ready to engage in conservation activities, volunteer for restoration activities, or donate money towards conservation restoration activities. By and large, folks were willing to say, I agree with that. I will engage in conservation activities. Both volunteering and donating started to fall into that neither agree nor disagree category. But a lot of times when asked or prompted to give feedback on this, folks would really ask, well, how would I even donate? Or how would I even volunteer? Again, suggesting that there is maybe a communication opportunity to better connect visitors to these opportunities. We also asked just general feedback. Is there anything you would like to share about your visit to Emiquon? 65 folks provided some feedback for us. So we went through and we coded out all of those responses, and several main themes emerged out of it. The main themes being positive experience, infrastructure/facilities, environmental concerns, access and opportunities, regulations/policy feedback, improvements and suggestions. And so folks really by and large were very positive, talked about the fun and enjoyment and the peacefulness of the site, quotes like, the wetlands are maturing really nicely, keep up the great work. But we also saw folks giving feedback on things like the paths, the observation points, facilities, letting us know that they had environmental concerns. Things like the lotus are taking over, birds have decreased, fishing has been bad for 3 years. They wanted to know how to volunteer. They made mention of the fact that they love to drive through for birding because they're semi-disabled, so they were able to get close to the birds in the marsh without walking, and the improvements and suggestions went on. So what does this all mean, right? This is a lot of really great, exciting information, perhaps the most comprehensive that Emiquon or the Nature Conservancy ever has had on Emiquon visitors. And what we really come away with is the fact that to date, visitor characteristics, especially for this peak season, reflected the local demographic numbers, and there is a large number of repeat visitors. The visitor experience is not just birding. There's differences that exist between these different visitor typologies. Overall experiences were positive, but it's something that as we go into various iterations of this survey, we're going to keep an eye on to see if those typologies change any of those trends. The benefits of nature are very important to the visitors coming to Emiquon. Their emotional attachment is high, but that functional attachment is lower, suggesting, again, opportunity for maybe communication and interaction to grow and support that a little bit more, and that there's an opportunity to grow TNC membership and awareness. Visitors are primed to be engaged, but they need help, and we need to make sure that Emiquon is telling the right story. Next steps include analyzing the results from the non-peak season sampling, which we conducted in February 2024, which coincided with the spring migration and Eagle Day weekend activities. And we're also going to be running the same survey with two key groups, birders and waterfowl hunters, via our online survey to make sure that we're really getting feedback from all of our key user groups that we're aware of. And then we're also going to be completing phase 3 and 4. So up to this point, we've really been working on phase 2, looking at who those visitors are, why they come. Into phase 3, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into visitor perceptions and awareness of floodplain restoration and conservation activities, and start to begin how we can maybe encourage folks to be more activated into TNC's mission in terms of volunteering and donations. And we're also going to be looking at AIM 6, which is figuring out who are the non-visitors, what's keeping them from coming, and what can we do to make this a more usable site for a much broader constituency. So thank you so much for hanging in. Looking forward to answering any questions you might have, but feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Thank